Hi, I'm Christopher Hanlon of Eastern Illinois University, here with another installment of the Close Reading Cooperative, the podcast in literary studies for English majors. Now, for the next couple of weeks on the Close Reading Cooperative, we've decided we want to do a sort of a mini-series around the subject of Scansion. Now, we started Scansion actually last semester with a couple of episodes built around the problem of recognizing iambs and trochees. And if you haven't seen those episodes, I'd encourage you to go to iTunes and download them. You can view them at any time you want, because we're going to be building on the information we started to gather up in those episodes. But to review a little bit, though, in order to scan a line of poetry, we need to first recognize what sorts of feet the line consists of. Now, a foot, recall, is a set of syllables where the emphasis falls in some particular place. This week, we want to build our tools as scanners of metrical poetry by talking about a few more kinds of feet. Now, you'll recall that an iamb is a kind of foot that consists of two syllables where the emphasis falls on the second syllable, whereas a trochee also consists of two syllables, but this time the emphasis comes on the first syllable. Now, this week, I want to talk to you about two more kinds of bisyllabic feet that go by the name of spondees and pyrrhics. Now, a spondee is a two-syllable foot where both syllables are emphasized. Actually, the word spondee itself, if you think about it, is a spondee. Both of those syllables have an accent. Whereas a pyrrhic is a bisyllabic foot, neither of which are emphasized. Now, spondees and pyrrhics are unusual kinds of feet in that it's very difficult, if you think about it, to imagine a whole line of verse poetry that consists of nothing but spondees, though there are some examples. And a pyrrhic, on the other hand, it's virtually impossible to imagine a line of poetry that has no emphasis anywhere, and that would consist entirely of pyrrhics. But this week, I just want you to think about those two kinds of feet and think about ways to recognize them in the verse poetry that you're assigned. And actually, I want to leave you off with an example of a poem where I think we can see some spondees and pyrrhics appearing to interesting effect. Now, this is a really famous poem by Emily Dickinson about a locomotive that's appearing in the landscape. It's often called "I Like to See It Lap the Miles," taking its title from the first line there. Let me read the first stanza to you, and you see if you can hear the meter as it unfolds. I like to see it lap the miles, and lick the valleys up, and stop to feed itself at tanks, and then prodigious step. Now, I'm going to stop there just to point out that the meter is obviously iambic, right? The emphases appear on the second syllables, and actually this is a poem that's very typical for Dickinson in that the meter unfolds according to this common hymn pattern that we've talked about before in the Close Reading Cooperative. That is, first we have 4 sets of feet, followed by 3 sets of feet, followed by another 4, followed by another 3. Now, this is a really interesting poem, and I don't want to give it short shrift by skipping big parts of it, but in fact, I am going to skip the 2 middle stanzas of the poem, because the point I want to make has to do with what happens to the meter toward the end of the poem. But suffice it to say for now that, just like any number of Dickinson poems, she establishes this common hymn meter right in the beginning, setting us up to expect these iambs all falling into neat rows. But then in the last stanza, something different happens. And nay like Baroniges, then, punctual as a star, stop, docile and omnipotent, at its own stable door. Now, you can hear a difference in this stanza here. The iambs have been disrupted, but using Scansion, we can point to the very places where that disruption happens. In that first line, for instance, and nay like Baroniges, our first foot is an iamb, in fact, but it's followed by a foot that doesn't give us any accent at all. Now, recall, that's called a pyrrhic. Right? 2 syllables, no emphasis on either one. Now, the introduction of that pyrrhic right in the middle of that line not only serves to disrupt things to make the meter have a more interesting sound to it, but it really brings out those other 2 points of emphasis on nay and Baroniges. But now if we look at the last 2 lines here, something different is happening. Stop, docile and omnipotent. Now, the first few syllables of that line, stop, docile and omnipotent, really disrupts the iambic pattern, doesn't it? Stop and the first syllable of docile are both emphasized, and once again, that's exactly what we call a spondee. It's kind of nice how Dickinson uses it at that place in the poem, right where she said stop, because the spondee has an effect of introducing a kind of metrical stop, right? Where we're reading it, we pause and we notice what's happening. Okay, now this is just the beginning to our little mini-series here. We're going to continue to talk more about Scansion next week. But for this week, be on the lookout for spondees and pyrrhics. They appear all over the place. So as you're reading the poetry you've assigned for your class, see if you find some. And I'll see you next week on the Close Reading Cooperative.